Over the past few decades, vascular surgery has grown in starts, stops, and spurts until finally it is recognized worldwide as a true surgical specialty. There were many obstacles to overcome in this evolutionary process, including lack of diagnostic testing, both invasive and non-invasive, lack of proper instrumentation, and thirdly, lack of proper training. Dr. Charles Robb observed that the two most important contributions of the century to vascular surgery were, first, invention of the fabric graft by Arthur Voorhees, which Dr. DeBakey championed and brought the Dacron graft to common use throughout the world. The second was the invention of the Fogarty catheter. And I would add a third, the endovascular concept, specifically the aortic endograft, an ingenious concept of the famous Juan Perotti. The SVS decided to document these historic events in several ways. A committee was formed, the History Project Work Group, in 2011 and charged with this responsibility. The history of SVS was made into a DVD spearheaded by Dr. Jimmy Yao. Some 81 audiovisual interviews have been conducted with the leaders and contributors to the development of vascular surgery. These interviews include all available presidents of SVS, as well as other vascular surgeons who have made special contributions. Unfortunately, many of these pioneers could not be interviewed for various reasons, such as illness or earlier demise. Perhaps the most important of these pioneers, known as the father of modern vascular surgery, was Dr. Michael DeBakey of Houston. Although renowned as a general surgeon and heart surgeon, it is the opinion of SVS that Dr. DeBakey was primarily influential in the arena of vascular surgery. Due to the enormous influence of Dr. DeBakey, SVS has decided to review the DeBakey Museum, which was opened in May of 2010. The purpose of this movie tour today is to review the extraordinary career of Dr. DeBakey. And SVS would like to put him in proper perspective relative to the evolution of vascular surgery. At this time, I'd like to turn these comments over to our chairman, Dr. Jimmy Yao.
About maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I got a phone call from Norman Rich. He was told by the leadership of the SVS to develop a committee to keep the archives of surgery of the society as well as vascular surgery as a specialty. He asked me to join him to work on the committee, and I agreed, and I immediately thought about Roger, because Roger had done a couple interviews before. So we start a committee called History Project Work Group. With 3 of them, we soon realized it's not enough manpower. So we expand the committee to 11, and many of them are based in Chicago because it's close to the office of the society. Today we are here to record what we have seen, unbelievable evidence of what Dr. DeBakey had done. And I hope you all enjoy the recording. And now I would like to turn this to Dr. Butler, who is the man design and build this library of Dr. DeBakey.
In 1979, I succeeded Dr. DeBakey as the president of Baylor College of Medicine. And at that time, he mentioned to me he would like to see his various materials, papers and materials, preserved. So we began to talk about it periodically, maybe once a year, and finally came to the position that he would like to donate all of his memorabilia and papers to the College of Medicine with the understanding that we would protect them and display them. He wanted students, residents, visitors to have a feel for what it was that he did. But he also wanted the library to reflect the work of others, because the College of Medicine was really, to a large extent, developed under his guidance. We began to think seriously about it about 5 years before he died. And we hired an architect from Houston and a consultant in museums from Alexandria, Virginia. They came up with a general plan for the library, which we reviewed with Dr. DeBakey, and he was very pleased with it. And over the period of the following year, it was amended and finally came to the shape that it's in today. In putting together the library exhibit itself, he was very involved in that when I was preparing the materials, he would want to know about them. Shortly before he died, when we had finalized the mock-ups of the exhibits, and we did full-size mock-ups, we had them displayed in our boardroom. He was in his wheelchair. He wheeled around from exhibit to exhibit. He got all toward the end. He said, he looked at me, he said, "Bill, I really was the father of vascular surgery, wasn't I?" So I think he was satisfied with the museum, and we all have been satisfied with the museum, because it reflects his great life, his innovations, and with innovations along with others who are also displayed here in the library. The library tells a story. It starts with his childhood, development of the roller pump, his work with the National Library of Medicine in the Armed Forces, then on to Baylor in 1948, where he became chairman of surgery, in a medical school building, which was the only building in the medical center. He came at the very beginning of the college. It then goes on to speak of his first in cardiovascular surgery, and each is delineated in a separate panel. It also has panels showing other discoveries which were non-vascular, many instruments he developed, and so forth. And then finally we created a space where we could display some of his awards, pictures and memorabilia, and we patterned it after his conference room in his office. It came about a lot, partly because of donations. The DeBakey Medical Foundation, Houston Endowment, and donors, as you'll see on the wall, all gave materially to help us develop this library space.
We also have with us today Richard Lynn, representing the American College of Surgeons. Charlie McCullough, George Noon, and Ken Maddox are also here representing some of the early faculty that is still with us. We'd like to start the tour this time with our moderator, Ken Maddox. Ken?
I'm really privileged to be able to give you the history, the contributions, and the personality, the management style of the man, Michael DeBakey. And we're in the DeBakey Museum Library with a number of panels, and what I will do is spend some time with each panel. The first panel is on his early education and surgical training. But we have to start first with his birth in 1908 in Calcasieu Parish, Lake Charles, Louisiana, where he was born to a pharmacist father by the name of McGaghy, and they later changed their name to from DeBakey to DeBakey. And Dr. DeBakey had 5 siblings, 1 brother and 4 sisters. They all excelled in all the work they did. By the time he was in grade school, he had discovered that most of the books in the library he had checked out. He found one book they wouldn't let him check out, or one series of books called the Encyclopedia Britannica. He told his father that they wouldn't let him check it out, so his father bought the Encyclopedia Britannica. And before he started before he started high school, he had read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica, as well as some of his other siblings. He had a voracious appetite for learning. While in high school, he played the saxophone. He played in the high school band, as will be shown in the yearbook here. And he skipped a year of high school, went to Tulane University, where in 2 years he completed the entire coursework for his bachelor's degree and had enough credit to go to medical school. He walked to Tulane. He walked very early so he could study early. In walking very early, he was noticed by a surgeon in New Orleans by the name of Rudolph Matas. You will see a picture of Dr. DeBakey and Dr. Matas in 1954. But in those early days in New Orleans, Dr. Matas said, "Young man, would you like a ride?" And they met each other. Dr. Matas asked him over to his house. Dr. Matas, a prominent surgeon at the time, had almost every journal in the world of many languages and floor-to-ceiling books. Dr. DeBakey told me he spent many hours in Dr. Matas's house, reading those journals, talking about surgery. So his first mentor in New Orleans was Dr. Matas. Following Dr. Matas as chairman of the Medical School's Department of Surgery was Alton Ochsner, whose photograph you will see. We'll come back to Dr. Ochsner in a bit. While a medical student, Dr. DeBakey received the task to give blood transfusions, which first indication of vascular surgery. He was required to start an IV in a donor and in a recipient, and then with a syringe, pull blood out of the donor and give it to the recipient. And at later time, there was a valve that you didn't have to move the syringe around. And he said there's got to be a better way, and developed a better way we'll talk about in a few moments. Age 23, with that invention, he was admitted to medical school, which he completed in 2 years, and to a surgery residency, which he completed in 2 years. So in 6 years, he received a bachelor's degree, an MD degree, and a Master's of Science degree in surgery, plus completing what at that time was a general surgery residency. Thoracic surgery, vascular surgery, critical care did not exist, so his certificate was the only certificate that was available. He later then was grandfathered into these other disciplines. During those early days following his training, Dr. Ochsner actually sent Dr. DeBakey to Europe to visit in some of the largest operating rooms with interest in vascular surgery that existed, particularly with René Lariche and Martin Kirschner in Heidelberg. And he came back with a world of information that it was existent at that period of time.
He felt at that time that the best training in surgery was in Europe. And so he was lucky, he said, because my parents had enough money to send me over and spend the year in Strasbourg and the year in Heidelberg. And so he thought he was very impressed with what he saw, and it influenced his surgical career after that.
I talked earlier about the roller pump, which was developed during his 23rd year of age. The alteration from previous roller pumps is that he developed crimping on the tubing, which could be locked down to prevent the tubing from walking as it went around, thus preventing damage to the blood. About the time he finished developing of that roller pump for blood transfusions, blood banking came into being, and it had to be put into the storeroom of the hospital. Years later, At a meeting of the American Surgical, Gibbon, who developed the first successful practical heart-lung machine, said, "I got a great heart-lung machine, but I don't have a pump that'll move the blood fast enough." Dr. DeBakey said, "Have I got a good deal for you?" Stored in the basement of Tulane Hospital. And they put them together. And for decades after that, the pump which was used in cardiopulmonary bypass was the DeBakey roller pump. In the early 1940s, the World War II was underway. Dr. DeBakey felt he should serve his country in the U.S. Army. He went to Europe, he went to Northern Africa. He developed some of the principles we used for decades in colon trauma, and made some policies which stood their test of time for a long time. He ultimately became the surgical consultant in the Office of the Surgeon General, where he continued to work on the mass hospital to rapidly care for victims of trauma near the site of injury. He also was part of the group that met at the Excelsior Hotel at the end of the war and helped form the Excelsior Society, which exists until this day. While in Washington, he went to the library of the U.S. Army and found that the roof leaked and that there was no proper complete library. And out of that developed then the National Library of Medicine, which both he and his younger sisters worked in for a great deal of time. That library and its adjacent National Institutes of Health exist to this day. These panels detail that significant contribution that he made to the National Library of Medicine and the National Institute of Health. In the early 1940s, business leaders from Houston were wanting to develop the Texas Medical Center and begin to develop that concept. One of the early buildings, as a matter of fact, the first permanent building after the designation of the Texas Medical Center, was Baylor College of Medicine, completed in about 1946, 1947, as depicted in these photographs. They then needed to develop a faculty, and a number of the panels in this museum show the development of that early campus and that early leadership of both deans and chairmen of departments. Although not the first department to be recruited, one of the early departments was Dr. DeBakey in 1948. He came, interviewed, and turned the school down for a number of reasons. It had no hospital. They didn't have an endowment. They didn't know where the money was coming from. And after a second or even a third or fourth interview, he finally accepted in 1949. As you see, these panels show the continuous growth of the buildings of the Texas Medical Center and many of the affiliated hospitals that then were used in the training. In the mid-1940s, before Dr. DeBakey came, the first classes were in the Sears Roebuck building under Dean Morrison, who is one of the brains and geniuses that brought the young Dr. DeBakey to be the new chairman. Early after arriving, he did not operate, did not have a hospital where he could operate. And he was building the medical school classes, building the residency program, and in some of the hospitals where he found significant complications and deaths, they wouldn't even let him make rounds as a teacher because he found too many errors. And they said, "You can't work here any longer, young man." At that point, Dr. DeBakey called Alton Ochsner and said, "Please let me come back to New Orleans." Alton Ochsner said, "No, go talk to Mr. Ben Taub, the chairman of the city county's Charity Hospital, they met, became long, fast friends. But that is a story for another day. In 1948, when Dr. DeBakey first came to Houston, every surgeon who remembers those days, most today would not, know that the clamps were crushing clamps. And all of the names of the clamps that are in the old ancient catalogs are crushing clamps. If you put a crushing clamp on a blood vessel, it will cut it in two, much like a pair of scissors. Dr. DeBakey, early after arriving at this institution, created a machine shop and found a brilliant machinist who was not an engineer, not a biomedical engineer. His name was Lou Feldman. He was in charge of the laboratories and the machine shop in the research laboratories within this building, Baylor College of Medicine. From those laboratories, Dr. DeBakey developed these clamps that have DeBakey names on them. If you look at those clamps, you realize that those are being sold by half a dozen companies all around the world for great profit. I really don't know that Dr. DeBakey ever developed a patent or a copyright on these clamps. I often saw Dr. DeBakey looking at his hands, looking at the clamp during an operation, making a modification, and then a week later having a new clamp put together by Lou Feldman, who also helped later on in the artificial heart program. Lou Feldman was not an engineer, and he did this just out of he and Dr. DeBakey talking. And you'll notice these have every shape, every twist, and have become the standard for vascular instruments around the world.
Ken, let me ask you this. The key to all the DeBakey instruments, particularly the clamping instruments and pickup instruments, had to do with the A-trawl grip. Who did Feldman, did he develop that? Did he think of that? Who developed the A-trawl grip that was so important in vascular surgery?
Meaning atraumatic
Right.
grip. Both of them talked about the jaws of both the clamp and the pickups. And I think it was just worked out by Lou Feldman and them together, and then it was trial and error.
I just can't imagine vascular surgery being done today without a DeBakey forceps with the atraumatic grip, all the clamps with the atraumatic grip, 2-to-1 teeth. It just revolutionized practical vascular surgery.
In the early 1950s, after Dr. DeBakey had met Mr. Taub, and they started having residents in the county hospital, the morgue of that hospital being in the basement, Dr. DeBakey went to the somewhat lethargic, slow medical examiner and said, "I'll tell you what, I'll do all your autopsies for you with my residents if you will let me scavenge the arteries and the aorta." So the residents in the 1950s, early 1950s, would do the autopsies and would take the aortas and would freeze dry them and put them in a sterile glass tubing, and these are some of the residual aortas and arteries that they acquired. Now, this was before the days of understanding hepatitis. We did not have HIV, but they were constructed, autoclaved, and thought to be pure and clean. This was done because we did not have any conduits to replace an aorta. So in order to use one of these grafts, one would take a glass cutter, cut the glass, wrap it in towels, break it, extract the dried, hard, fibrous homograft, soak it in saline for 30 minutes in order to prepare it. And so these were inserted in the early days of aorta replacement in aneurysmal or obstructive disease. Tragically, within a year, false aneurysms began to appear, and Dr. DeBakey said, there's got to be a better way. He had heard of previous surgeons using this new material called plastic. And the plastics which were popular at that time were Orlon and nylon. So Dr. DeBakey went down to the new Sears and Roebuck store, which is about a quarter of a mile from here, still open, and he went to the sales lady and he said to her, I would like some of that Orlon or nylon. And she said, we're fresh out of that material, but we have some of this new stuff called Dacron that will not sell. And he said, I'll take some. He took it home, and on his wife's sewing machine, he constructed a tube using this material. Now, it would need to be pre-clotted and worked with, but in Houston, whether or not it was used by somebody else, Dr. DeBakey used an opportunity, sort of an aha moment. And from then on, Dacron was used. Later, it was crimped, made in various sizes, but the first was made on his wife's sewing machine because the homographs we talked about developed false aneurysms, and there's got to be a better way. And Dacron turned out to be strong and able to meet the need. Subsequently, the Dacron has been made in many configurations by many companies and has been impregnated with various material to make it easier to use, better to use, more durable to use. And now that same Dacron material, as well as PTFE, which is really Teflon, used in a lot of the endografts. They were used in all of Dr. DeBakey's time in open procedures, not endo procedures. And here we have replicated the very operating room and the very instruments that were used during that time. The three of us, either as a medical student, a resident, an associate, have been around these very devices more hours than any of us have capability to count. This is an actual operating room with its instrumentation that we use. Now, of course, the instruments are not here. They're the ones you saw earlier. You will notice that the electrocoagulation machine that we used at that time is 5-10 times larger than the current one. You will notice that the anesthesia machine is totally different than the one that we use today. You will notice that the monitoring is very minimal, basically non-existent. You will notice that the operating room table is not electrically operated as the one today. And you'll notice in the back of the room, the circulating Mayo table that is totally different than the small ones used today. This was designed by Dr. DeBakey in the machine shop in order to have both the reserve instruments, the spare instruments, next to those that are used immediately. And the scrub nurses at the time were wonderful in being able to know all of those instruments. Dr. DeBakey, as I remember it, liked lots and lots of instruments. And you will see a roller pump that has a bag oxygenator. Today we use a membrane oxygenator with its DeBakey roller pumps. Since Dr. Noon and Dr. McCullum spent a lot of time first assisting Dr. DeBakey and sometimes being first assisted by Dr. DeBakey in this very room, I will let them comment on their recollections of this room and talk about this big gadget that dominates the room with those hot lights on it that looks like a bed on top.
I think some of the important things is that some of these devices that you see were developed here and improved here in our operating rooms. For example, the cell saver here, there was no means of auto transfusion. or an intraoperative transfusion until this was developed. The bubble machine you are seeing, we had the heart-lung machine over there with a bubble oxygenator with a plastic bag. One of the things that you see in there is the still wool, and they had a silicone spray that they sprayed on the blood as it went through to keep it from foaming up. Today, you would be in big trouble if you tried to do that. The operating room table, as he said, was designed by Dr. DeBakey so that all the instruments that he might potentially need for an operation would be on there. They wouldn't have to go to the closets or outside the operating room. He had it all on that. And the operating room table he explained to you. And then he was very interested in visual ed. And so there was a cameraman that was lying on top of that bed that you see up there with his camera face down. And that's where all of the visual ed in the operating room was being obtained.
For the entire operation, he would lay down up there?
He would lay down up there.
4 hours?
4 hours.
5 hours?
5 hours. 2 days.
I don't have much else to add, but Dr. DeBakey was a little bit impatient at times, and he didn't want the circulating nurse to have to go to the cabinets or whatever it is to get the instruments. So that table was absolutely full of instruments. It would take the OR nurse, 20, 30 minutes to set all that up, and he had that on every case that he did. One thing that Dr. DeBakey didn't like is people getting in his light. And I can remember he would give students and residents and me and George lessons in physics, that light travels in a straight line and you were not supposed to get in the way of that. And so that's why he had all these things, and the cameraman used to be behind him, and it's very difficult. So that system was developed, and this place and this department turned out some wonderful audiovisual.
Some of those movies, audio visuals, have been replicated by the college and put now off of film and put on DVDs. Those are always interesting to watch and have been done quite well. Dr. DeBakey also didn't like you to adjust the light. He would adjust the light. And I remember the hat lecture. And he would ask me if I've ever worn a hat. Yes. Do I wear someone else's hat? No. Did anyone else adjust my hat? No. And that would quickly morph into a lesson about therefore don't change my light with the appropriate amount of re-emphasis. The operating room that we have just seen would actually be initially 2 operating rooms in the older Methodist, ultimately 3 operating rooms in the old Methodist. In the Brown Fondren building, some 4 operating rooms that and ultimately 8 operating rooms that would be going simultaneously. I remember one day in the 1960s at both the Methodist Hospital, the St. Luke's Hospital, the Texas Children's Hospital, the VA Hospital, and the Ben Taub Hospital, as many as 75 cardiovascular procedures would be done in one day. And from that time, advances were made in the existing vascular surgery, and new operations were done, many times the firsts. In the panels behind us, you will see the first successful resection of an aneurysm of the abdominal aorta in the United States, the first successful treatment of an aneurysm of the thoracic aorta, the first successful treatment of an aneurysm of the distal aortic arch, a first successful treatment of a dissecting aneurysm. And about this time was also the first successful operation for carotid artery stenosis. In 1955, the first successful treatment of a thoraco-abdominal aneurysm, the first successful treatment of an aneurysm of the ascending aorta, and the first successful treatment of an aneurysm of the entire aortic arch. During this time, peripheral vascular surgery on the femoral artery, the importance of the popliteal artery, further ramifications on cerebral vascular disease, renal artery stenosis, and even distal artery repair, endarterectomy, and replacement with endografts were being made in these operating rooms where incredible amount of activity would be going on. The fellows that rotated through here at the time would just look at the board and say, which fancy operation do I want to watch go on today?
Well, for some reason or other, Dr. DeBakey was interested in the heart and saving the heart and using assist devices or total cardiac replacement to treat heart disease. So he started out with a total artificial heart, which was, they did animal implants. And at the time he started, he was able to get a grant from the NIH to support the research and development of these devices. But they were having trouble keeping animals alive with a total artificial heart, so they started leaning more toward left ventricular assisted devices, and so they had developed a series of devices that were evaluated mainly in calves, so we did a lot of calf and cow surgery. And this is a device here that went from the left atrium to the descending thoracic aorta, which was placed in by Dr. Stanley Crawford. They continued working on left ventricular assist devices and really cut back on the research that was being done on the total artificial heart because they felt the left ventricular bypass was a better option at this time. You have to remember this was before they had heart transplants. This was in the early 50s and 60s. And the heart transplant wasn't done until 1967. And these are just some more examples of these devices. They were extracorporeal devices on the outside of the body with cannulas going into the ascending aorta and to the left ventricular, and were pumped. And we have a picture here of this pump right here, which you can see on the outside of the body, laying on those towels. And that patient had a double valve replacement and could not be weaned off cardiopulmonary bypass. And so they brought the left ventricular assist device over there, which was implanted with a cannula going into the left atrium and one into the axilla. And this patient was supported for a period of 9 days and had heart recovery. And at the 9th day, the pump was removed by making an incision into skin level for the left atrium and oversewing that cannula and removing the cannula from the right axillary artery. So it was removed without having to do cardiopulmonary bypass, which would have killed her if they had to do another open operation. So she lived successfully for another 10 years and was killed in an automobile accident in Mexico City. These are just pictures of a series of different valves that were being developed partly by us, a bit more by others during that period of time. There's a DeBakey valve, and there's a Cooley valve in there, and multiple other valves. And you can see they went from the ball valve to the leaflet valves. These are all, of course, mechanical valves. Because of the size, mainly of the assist devices that were used for total artificial heart and for left ventricular bypass, we were limited into the size of the patient that we could put these in because they were fairly large. So we felt that we could go to NASA maybe and get some help from them. And we had an engineer out there that we had performed a heart transplant on. We called him up and asked him to put us in touch with the people who would be influential and know what to do with axial flow pumps. And so we went and visited 3 engineers out there. And they put together a device which eventually you can see right here is an axial flow pump that goes from the left ventricle to the ascending aorta. And one of the things that these mechanical, especially the pulse style pumps, they all made a lot of noise. So you could sit on the ward where these patients were walking down on with their nurse and you're getting their exercise. You sit on the ward and close your eyes and you could hear. And it was a specific noise for each pump, so you could call out the pumps as they walked by name, and we were always right. The only problem we had when we got to the axial flow pumps, it didn't make any noise. And so they kept waiting, when are they going to walk by? And they said, well, they're way past you now. But anyway, this is all of the pumps that are being used for long-term circulatory assist are similar to this axial flow or centrifugal flow pump. We now have patients out over 9 years with these pumps that are doing well.
It's not just a bridge. You're leaving them.
In fact, today, there are more left ventricular assist devices on to destination therapy. This last year was the first year that they had more devices implanted than they did heart transplants. And each year it's increasing with the number of devices because you have an unlimited supply, and we're getting better and better results for long-term support with these, and so they're being implanted much more than they were, of course, several years ago.
In Dr. DeBakey's suite of offices, there were several rooms. Of course, his inner office. There was the rounding room where there were panels of X-ray view boxes where the resident had to put up the X-rays every day, where drawings were made with either number 2 black pencils or red pencils, and every day, every operation was recorded by Dr. DeBakey or one of the associates in the permanent charts. And there was the green room. There was green velvet on the side of the walls where from floor to ceiling and spreading out into the hallway were diplomas, photographs, awards, visitors, much like you see in the wall behind me. But it was wall to wall, floor to ceiling, on all 4 walls except for an entranceway where the door was. This memorabilia was tremendous. Dr. DeBakey was very proud of it, and visitors would spend a long time just looking at the walls, looking at the people, and we'll spend a little time looking at each of these photographs as well. The table that you see before you is the exact table which was in the middle of that room, comprising most of the floor space in that room, except for maybe 36 to 45 inches on either side of the ends of that table. This is the table that was in that conference room that we call the green room. It was where we had our staff meetings, and various staff members sat in almost the same seats. The identical staff members surgeons would arrive late, and they would sit in the back row. When you first joined the department, it took a while before the upper siblings or upper echelon even accepted the fact you were in the room. And it was an interesting phenomenon to watch. But it was a very cohesive group. They were very proud of the memorabilia that were in the room. But we discussed curriculum, we discussed residents, we discussed faculty, we discussed new operations, we discussed politics. One day, somebody had gone to the Society of Vascular Surgery and had come back from that Society of Vascular Surgery and talked about we need to be into understanding the biochemistry of clotting and the like. They said they were talking about prostaglandins, prostaglandin metabolism. Another member of the faculty, who was older than I was at the time, so it wasn't me, said, I just operate on vessels. I don't understand a thing about this prostaglandin. I remember distinctly that Dr. DeBakey let that go on for about 3 minutes, stopped and said, gentlemen, I think you're wrong, and then gave a 30-minute dissertation on the entire intermediary metabolism of arachidonic acids, prostaglandins, and where we ought to be, and where he thought they were going, and how he thought it affected vascular surgery. All of us were embarrassed. We didn't know when he learned all of this, how he remembered all of this, and he had the knowledge base to chide all of us who should have known more about arachidonic acid intermediary metabolism than we. So even in that room, he was continuing to teach. In this room, he was even continuing to teach us. For my education and development as a faculty member, I considered the discussions and the interactions in this particular room to be extremely important in that phase of my education.
It's a real masterpiece the way he was able to organize his rounding to learn about patients. The preparation that had to be made by those residents, the students, the nurses getting the x-rays, the laboratory work, etc., all prepared for the conference.
Consultants?
And then after he had all that, at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he would have rounds with all the consultants there. So he was looking at them face to face, getting their opinions and recommendations. And this went on every day. And x-rays weren't then like they are today, where you have a computer and you can look at it and they're organized. And up there, we had to get individual x-rays, get them prepared in the folders and ready to come out. This went on every day that he was here. And then after the operation, the patients all had, as he said, they had the drawings that he would do or we would do of the operation, so that you didn't have to read an operative report, you just look at the drawing. And then you would know exactly what the patient had and what you had to work with. So it was interesting to stick around and be a part of his rounds.
One of the things I remember about the staff meetings that we would have is about whatever subject was going on. There'd be a general discussion for several minutes or maybe 5-10 minutes, and then Dr. DeBakey would just calmly summarize everything and bring it into concise. He summarized it extremely well, and with his vast experience and understanding of what was going on, he just came up with the right answers all the time. It seemed to me like just an amazing capability.
How many patients would be on the floor at any given day to round on?
Well, he didn't round every day on all patients, but there'd be sometimes 90 to 100 patients. There was an earlier time when he was officing on even the first floor at one time at Methodist Hospital, and then the second floor, that he would walk up 9 flights of stairs. As time went on, well, he chose the elevator to go up, but there was a time when he would fly up the stairs. And the residents following behind him were breathless.
How many cases he average done every day?
At the Methodist Hospital alone, I think there would be a maximum of 20 in my memory. You have to, your question at Methodist, ultimately there were other practices, the Crawford practice, the Jimmy Howe practice, and others. But in the DeBakey rooms, I personally don't remember any more than 20 or so.
Just 20, Jimmy.
Craig Miller wrote a book on Bob Salinger, and during the time the surging thing, he found an operating schedule of DeBakey, and he published in your surgeons, American College Surgeon, and the list is around 23 cases, 6 coronary bypass, 3 aneurysm, and just a whole list, and then end up with 1 angiogram and 1 amputation.
Well, you've got to put that in perspective. That operating room included Dr. DeBakey's 3 or 4 operating rooms, and the other 4 operating rooms that were run by Crawford, Morris, Howell, sometimes George Noon, sometimes Charlie. And the arteriograms were done in those years by a translumbar aortogram needle, 17 gauge, 11 and a half, 12-inch needle, translumbar aortogram. And most of the arteriograms were done by Dr. DeBakey Associates, not the interventional radiologist. Those would often be on that schedule. So what I was talking about was operations by the DeBakey team only in their 4 rooms. You saw a bigger list. Remember also that during this same period of time, Dr. DeBakey was president of Baylor College of Medicine. He was a consultant to NIH and the National Library of Medicine. He was traveling around the world, and we never knew where he really was. He was going to Washington to get money for the artificial heart program. He was meeting with the various political and business leaders of Houston, the Board of Trustees of Methodist, and the Board of Trustees of Baylor. So operating was not the only thing he was doing. On this wall are merely a few of the photographs and memories and trophies and certificates that were in the green room. There, as here, are multiple photographs of world leaders: Nixon, Yeltsin. That looks like
Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton. Here is Ronald Reagan. Lyndon Johnson. Here is President of the United Arab Emirates. The Shah of Iran is here. Yes, right here. Here's Charlie McCarthy. Here is Guy Lombardo. Here are 4 presidents of Baylor in one photograph. Here is Jerry Lewis. In the original room, you would see this floor to ceiling on all 4 of the walls. In this cabinet are some of the things that Dr. DeBakey wrote. Here are the collected papers of Dr. DeBakey, which exceed 1,500. Here is the yearbook of general surgery, which he edited for many, many years. After he formed the Cardiovascular Research Center, he published in these blue journals articles both specifically for this journal, as well as reproductions of other papers that came out of the department. It was in that Cardiovascular Research Journal, which quite honestly I don't see here, that there are papers that appear nowhere else in the world. The original paper on the details of what happened in the first total artificial heart implantation at St. Luke's Hospital appears there within a very short period of time of when it happened. I just noticed this photograph is not on the wall, and this is Marlene Dietrich. And of course you see what makes her most famous is her beautiful legs that Dr. DeBakey preserved by a revascularization procedure. At the Methodist Hospital, you saw in the lobby the bus that was donated by King Leopold and Princess Liliane of Belgium. They presented it in 1978. Soon after that, about that time, the DeBakey International Surgical Society was formed, and they selected this mini bust as the symbol of that society. It has been given to a number of individuals. You will notice George Noon, Norm Rich, John Oshner, Frank Spencer, Bill Blaisdell, Rollo Hanlon, Henry Bonson, Stan Crawford, John Kirkland, Norm Shunway, Dave Sabiston, Frank Gabodi, Alton Oshner, and Charles DeBost are all vascular surgeons. So Dr. DeBakey and his society have contributed to the early vascular surgeons who helped contribute to this field of vascular surgery, for which this particular video is being put together. The Albert Lasker Award for Medical Research was given to Dr. DeBakey. This is that award which was given to him. He became a very close friend with Mary Lasker. The Congressional Gold Medal, which on its back says, "The pursuit of excellence has been my objective in life." And then Dr. DeBakey's emblem on the front is in, I think it's 21 karat gold. The Congressional Gold Medal was awarded by the Congress of the United States. This is the highest award given by the United States, and here it is the approval for that award and copies of the award ceremony. Dr. DeBakey was 135th recipient of the Congressional Gold Medal. The first such was given to George Washington. I asked Dr. DeBakey of what legacy or award was he most proud. Without hesitation, he gave me an answer. Would you care to launch a guess, or do you want me to tell you? Dr. DeBakey said without hesitation, I'm very proud of the Congressional Gold Medal. I'm very proud of the Lasker Award. But the award of which I am most proud, the legacy of which I'm most proud, are those individuals that I have trained and dotted the world to continue the field that I have started.
It was given to him in the rotunda of the Capitol. And after they gave him that award, the first thing he did is thanked everybody for it. And then he looked back at Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid were right there. And that was during the time of the debate over Obamacare. And he looked back over him and said, you know, you guys, there's an ideal prototype for a national health system, and that's the VA hospital system. I don't think they paid any attention to that whatsoever.
You can look at the picture of Dr. DeBakey with President Bush up there. They rolled him up on that platform to receive the award, and the person that rolled him up there forgot to put the brake on the wheelchair, and so Bush was standing right by him, and I saw Bush look down like this and look up, and then he went. Locked the brake. So DeBakey didn't go rolling off the stage.
The fact that he's trained various people that have gone around the world. Remember in the early 60s, all through the 60s, even up until 9/11, we had many international and national cardiovascular fellows in addition to our residents. And those fellows came from countries around the world. Dr. Gregory trained with many of those fellows, and you've kept contact with many of those since then through the DeBakey Society.